welcome to the Star Business Solutions 2020 webinar series. Today's topic is Greentree WebView, Part 2. This will be carrying on from the Part 1 of WebView, which we held prior to Christmas. Today's presenters are the usual Rogues Gallery, myself and Joshua Diffie. Josh will be doing a demonstration and taking you through a few things on WebView shortly, and at the end we will be holding a Q&A session. So today's agenda: WebView, what's in the name? WebView GL Reporting, financial reporting, the reports and documents library, and then followed by the question and answers. What I'd ask you to do is, as we're going through the webinar, please type in your questions as we go, because if you're like me, you'll get to the end and you'll forget what you wanted to ask. But if you type them in at the appropriate time, and we'll keep a list and go through the Q&A session at the end. So before we go any further, I'd like to introduce Joshua Diffie, General Manager for Star Business Solutions.
Thanks, Norman. Okay, so let's dive on in. So I've got a reasonable amount of content to cover today. So we're going to be taking a look at the reports and documents module within MYB Greentree, which covers a fairly large range of topics and concepts and areas within the system. So there's quite a few things to look at. So depending on version history that you might be on, the original naming of the module was WebView Financials, but over time, as additional functionality was added, it was appropriate for the name to change to Reports and Documents. So we'll dive on in. So financial reports within MYB Greentree can be handled in a couple of different ways with the Reports and Documents module. The two main ways are via the Greentree Windows client itself, or via the WebView Browser login options. So let's go ahead and take a bit of a look at the Greentree Windows client first. So with the Reports and Documents module, under the General Ledger menu, you'll have a number of additional options, but the two main ones we're focusing on today is the Financial Reporting Live and Financial Reporting Published. So let's take a look at Financial Reporting Live first. What this allows you to do is set up a number of financial reports within Greentree, and there's a number of security options we'll touch on shortly around who can see which of these reports, and then a number of steps beyond that, including what we call security groups. So if I was to run a relatively traditional month-to-date, year-to-date actual versus budget profit and loss, and I'll make this screen a little bigger, I can simply hit Run Now. Within the Reports and Documents module, it will track previously run reports with the exact same list of parameters, and it will tell you when it was last run, if it meets those parameters, and whether or not you wish to use that version or instead rerun it. So what this allows you to do is potentially have a schedule which sets up a number of reports, which we'll be touching on shortly, to speed up the process rather than having to run the reports live each time. But for the moment, I'm just going to run it live instead. Within the reports, as I mentioned before, we do have the ability of doing branch security or security groups within the Reports and Documents module, which can limit companies as well as segments in a chart of accounts. You can also define which of these sections you can expand and drill down to. So if I do have a look at this sales component, I can expand that and see the sub-tree branches or child tree branches of my income tree, and I can keep expanding that all the way down to the individual general ledger account. You'll notice that one of these cells is currently highlighted in yellow. So you've got the ability for a report just had a question come through confirming that there's sound. So before I go too much further, for those that are currently in the webinar, if you could let me know. Oh no, it's all good now. Apparently, must have been on a user's end. So we do have the ability of, as I said, storing notes against an individual cell within the financial report. So that allows you to do commentary and such on this specific report with the specific date range and selections. So if I do come in and hit Add View Notes on that cell, I can see a list of notes, who created it, when it was created, and I can drill through, potentially make changes, and so on. And there's the ability of defining different note types and some security around who can see those also. So you might have a situation where someone's gone over budget. You do have the ability of saying why that's occurred. These are also drillable. So you'll notice that my icon has changed to a little hand when I hover over any of these numbers. So if I do want to have a look at that $41,000, I can click on that and it will open up my View General Ledger screen, which is the same screen you might be familiar with from drilling down from the Excel add-in, the financial reporting engine in Excel module. If you're unfamiliar with that area, I can then continue down to see each individual transaction. And as long as I have access to those subsequent screens, I can keep drilling down. So potentially have a look at the GL journal or invoice or anything else that it might be that I'm looking at. You've got the ability within the Reports and Documents module in the financial reporting area to quickly expand or collapse all rows. You've got the ability of sending this to Excel or sending it to a PDF. Now we'll be going through a couple of the setup screens, not in a huge amount of detail, but enough to give you a bit of flavor of how to use this module, which defines some of this. But if I was just to open this report in Excel, that will launch my Excel. And show it in whatever format we've determined. So I've got some blues and some negatives in red and so on and so on. And if I was to just jump back to Greentree, there is a couple of options around how you wish to export that information to Excel or to PDF. You also have the option of saving this as a published report. Now, one of the things I mentioned a little earlier is that when I ran this report, it did say when it was last run and whether or not I wish to use that version instead or not. In addition to that concept, which is where I'd say more finance type users would have the ability of seeing when they last run it and simply use those results rather than recalculating them again. But you may also have a situation where end users have the ability of viewing these reports either through the Greentree browser login, WebView, through a reports and documents library, or via an email. So we do allow quite a significant number of ways of getting these reports to users. One of those is saving this as a published report. So if I was to hit Save as Published Report, that gives me the option to give it a report name, which it does default for me. I've got the ability of setting expiry dates. You've got the ability of assigning it to a folder in a Reports and Documents library, which we'll be covering a little bit later, but at the moment, I'm going to chuck that in my, let's go and put it in there. So once you've got that set up, you can also define whether or not it's a new version of an existing document, whether or not there are any permissions around this that you have to worry about, and it will tell you a little bit of additional information like what company the data are related to, who's opened and read, and so on. this report, any notes, and any additional attachments that you may decide to show. Okay. So we'll just dive on in to some of the other areas. So that's setting up, or I should say running the financial report. But the actual setup side of it is something that's a relatively simple process to be trained on and something that we're finding more and more common. So let's go and have a look at the report I just ran, which was the month-to-date, year-to-date variance report, and take a look at how that's set up. So I did mention there's a number of options around how you set up the Excel and PDF exports. So this is an area that we can take users to, and you do have the ability of having common sections across reports. So whether that be what we call Excel headers. So when I was in my report, if I was to view that as a page layout, you will notice that it's put in the headers when it was printed, some company details, and the period that it was run for. All that information has come from this Excel header, which we can train you how to use, but it's effectively giving you the option of defining what information is showing and in what order. The actual report itself has three main items that you need to use or set up, and they can be shared across reports if it's appropriate. So I've got a row format called profit and loss set up, which we've gone through and defined a Greentree reporting tree. And then each of the lines, you can define which tree branch is used within that tree, and also some basic calculations around which rows are added or subtracted, or potentially even divided by if required there. What that means is if you have multiple profit and loss reports with different formats, which I have in my demonstration system, like month-to-date, year-to-date, or maybe a 12-month rolling P&L, they may share the exact same row format across multiple reports. So you can set it up once and reuse it where appropriate. The column format is really quite often more report specific, but can also be shared if appropriate also. And if I was to drill into that one, this is where we start actually looking at how we've come up with the various numbers. Now, we won't go through every single option on this report because well, A, it's a bit more of a training exercise, but B, we just wouldn't cover that in the time permitted. However, you do have the ability of selecting quite a large range of different column types. The most common are the ones you can see in there at the moment, which is actual and budget values in local currency. You can also look at it in foreign currency. You can do calculation columns, which is another common option, as well as report on transaction analysis codes, and as I said, a range of different alternate options. Here I've got the option of saying how we're going to go about managing this. So it's the month-to-date report. So it's simply the date entered period to the date entered period. A very simple scenario there, versus being a year-to-date report, the opening balance to the date entered. You've then got the ability of adding a number of headings, a number of styles, which you can define, which can dictate things like whether or not numbers show in negatives, whether or not they're in brackets, in red, and so on. And lastly, as I said, the three main components for a financial report is the account group maintenance, or branch security, as it's commonly referred to. That gives you the option of setting up a tree-like structure, and each of those areas you can define which users have access to it, which companies they're allowed to use, and which GL accounts. And as you can see, you can do GL account prefixes. So making it a very easy way of setting up one report format, but then allowing users to run that by branch, by cost center or division, or a combination of all the different various segments that you wish to track. You can also define who the email recipients are for this report, which will make a little bit more sense when we start looking at schedules. But I can see, if I expand this a little bit more, all the various companies that this report has email recipients for. So I can see that I get this for both the eComputers Australia as well as the eComputers Consolidated in two different report security groups. So taking a look a little bit at the reports within the Greentree client, a little bit of the setup options. I talked about there being a number of ways of running the reports, and the other one was via the WebView browser. So let's jump on in and have a look at that. So the Greentree WebView browser, if I just come in and have a look at my demo login, is where we were looking at, or where we left off, I should say, in the last webinar. We focused a lot around the WebView designer components of this module, and we left the financial components for this webinar series. So if I was to log into my Australian company, all the screens and menus and how we log in and so on was covered in the last webinar. So I do strongly recommend for those who haven't watched that to potentially find that on our YouTube channel and check that out at a later stage.
It's also found on our website. If you go to the Insights page, click on the filter that says Webinar, you'll find that and all the former webinars.
So under the General Ledger menu I've got set up, I've got my financial reports. Now you can create report groups, and that's another way of doing report security. So I've got one called All Reports, and you'll see that month-to-date, year-to-date variance report I just ran before is showing in that menu. So this is one way of defining who can see which of the reports. If I was to drill into that, the screen looks very similar in nature to the screen we looked at within the Greentree Windows client, as you would obviously expect, but there's obviously a few browser components to it. So if I do come in and hit Run Now, I'm going to get that same message that I got before, but once again, let's just rerun this from scratch. That's going to go and retrieve the data and return it in the exact same format that we were looking at in the previous screens. I still have the ability of drilling down into this information and potentially seeing those notes. So all the features and functions we just went through, so being able to save to Excel, save to PDF, drill or view notes, I can come in and view that information in here also. Depending on whether or not you have the WebView Designer module or not, will dictate exactly how the next drill down screen looks. But if I do have a look at that GL accounts drill down area, I've got the option of seeing the transactional information. If you have the WebView Designer module, you can dictate how far you can keep drilling. So for example, if I was to click on that AR invoice, I've got an AR invoice drill down screen set up. However, if you don't have the WebView Designer, then you would effectively get the ability to see which transactions have occurred for that general ledger account, but not drill further. In addition to being able to run the reports live, being able to select the security, define your Excel or PDF report output, which budget you might be running this report on. Within that menu, there are a number of additional options, and one of those is the GL published reports. So you might decide that you only want users to have access to a report once you've run it and you've confirmed the numbers, potentially add your own commentary and so on. So if I was to come to GL published reports, I would get a list of all the reports that I have access to and when they were run and what account group they're related to. So you'll notice, if I expand this column just a little bit, I have the profit and loss month-to-date, year-to-date variance for May 2016, all branches, Division 2, Division 3, Division 1. So I have access to all of that. Now, rather than having to go run them individually, I can simply come in and go, well, at the moment, I'm interested in Division 2. That will open up the report. it won't recalculate. It'll simply go and grab the values from last time. Alternatively, I can click here to view it now. I can expand on that in the same format I did previously and still have the options of exporting if appropriate. It's a quicker and easier task for users who potentially are only looking at reports. Okay for it. Okay. So that's taken a little bit of a look at an end user running the reports, a couple of the back-end setup screens. I thought I'd talk now once again a little bit more about how you can, the additional options about getting that information out to users. So under the report schedule maintenance area, you can set up a number of schedules. So if I was to come in here, what this allows you to do is set up multiple reports. You can define which of the account groups within account group branches, I should say, within the account groups you're going to use, and whether or not you're simply going to do it for all sub branches. So you'll notice that this one has all branches, Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. If I select the all branches and tick sub, that's going to run the report for all branches and its sub branches. So effectively, it's going to generate 4 published reports. In addition, I've got the option of saying a few extra options. So how I wish the Excel output to be, whether or not there's an expiry on this report. So if you do have a situation where you've just simply got quite a large number of reports and you want to make it a small list for users, by all means, you can set up expiries within that. You can run this for a number of reports. So I've got that profit and loss month to date, but maybe I also want it for the 12-month actuals. You can define if it's for a specific period, the current period, or there is a WebView date, which you can set as well. So if I was just to go in and hit run now, this is going to go and create 4 published reports for me, all in one go. So if I hit run now, it does tell me it's going to override some, or gives me the option of overriding some published report expiries, but let's just go ahead and hit OK for the moment. So the generating financial report will pretty much just have a progress bar that in this example is going to run for 4 times. And then I'll get a message telling me that it's all done and ready to go. Okay, so if I was now to go to my reports library, sorry, we'll go to our general ledger published reports, I should say. I can see there's the 12-month actuals, and if I expand on that, I can see when it was created, so funnily enough, just now, and same with the month-to-date actual versus budget. And I can see, once again, it's gone and created those just now with just a couple of seconds between each of those. So just like when I was in WebView, where I went to General Ledger GL Published Reports, you'll now see that those have been added to my list. I can group this by the report, I can search on it, and so on. So that's how easy it is to update this list and get users access to the various reports. You can do that within Greentree itself as well through this Publish Report screen. Within here, depending on your access, you've got the ability, so here's the one I just ran, of viewing the report, seeing the PDF, or seeing the Excel, or if there is any notes, I could look at that also. So if I wanted to view the report, I can simply double click on that icon, and it's going to open up the financial report view with the report already selected and the data there. So I can still go through and expand on that if need be. Same with the PDF and Excel, it can drill that right down. If I was just to drill elsewhere on the line, or potentially come back to the report name, it will open up my published report record. Apologies. And And once again, this is I can get to the email, Excel, or PDF. Okay, so we've got access to the financial reports within the Windows client. We've got access to them via the WebView Browser. We've got access to them via the scheduled reports, either through the Windows client or the WebView Browser. In addition, when I hit that report schedule maintenance, you do have the option of also emailing those through using email templates. So those can define what information will show to the user. Now, depending on how you've got that all set up, that will result in a number of different email formats, but here's one where I can see the Excel file and the PDF. So if I was simply to drill into that, I could see there's my 12-month actual P&L as a PDF sent out to a user. And as I said, you do have the option of defining just exactly what shows in the body and subject of these emails using the email templates. That can reduce user counts. So obviously Greentree being a concurrent user, if you do have people or a large number of people who need to have access to reports, but don't need to log in and drill into the information, then you might find that the email schedules are a very good utility to reduce your license count and get that information out there quickly and efficiently to the users. Okay, so that's a bit of the financial report side. Some of this we'll be touching a little bit more on in the reports and documents section, which we're about to touch on. As Norman said at the start of the webinar, if you do have any questions while we're touching on them at the end of the session, I would highly recommend chucking them in that questions section of the GoToWebinar, just so as you don't forget them. So what is the Reports and Documents Library? So the Reports Library is the ability to create a library to store reports in one place, reducing the need for paper printouts or hard copies of reports. It gives you the option to do version control, as well as handle library security to define who can add, view, or delete reports. Some of the benefits of this module are a centrally stored set of results. So you're not requiring to run the report each time when looking at historical data, and the ability to add notes and comments, not just to the financial reports that we've touched on, but to any report or document that you might store within the Reports and Documents Library. So let's go take a look at the Reports and Documents Library, and then we'll come back to some of the how it was set up and ways of getting additional reports in there. So the Reports Library can either be accessed via the Reports menu, alternatively you can access it via the browser login as well, which we'll touch on shortly. You've got the ability of defining your own menu structures, but even before that, I can see I have notifications of 6 unread reports. From that, I can come in, I can see what the report name was, which of the folders, so I can see it's monthly report 2016, financial year 2016, and so on. So I can either come in and only look at the unread items for that folder, or as I said, I can just look at the list within here. If I'm looking for a specific report, I do have the option of simply typing in the name contains and look for maybe the profit report. And as you can see, that reduces my list. If I was just to simply double click on one of these reports, what this will do, depending on the type of report, it will either show a drill down view, which is the exact same screen we've been looking at of late, if I expand that a bit more, which is from the Reports and Documents financial reports, as well as just a PDF view. Now, you can add non-Greentree reports or non-Greentree documents to this, or even non-financial reports that are Greentree based. So there's a number of ways of getting them in there, and we'll touch on those shortly. You've got the ability of adding notes. So this isn't the exact same thing as what we were looking at in the Reports and Documents financial reports. This is the ability of adding notes overall to the report, as well as comments and so on. You've got the option of seeing the actions that have occurred. So when it was moved, changed, it will also include potentially who's viewed it and when, and how they viewed it. So I can see that the super user viewed it today within the Greentree application. Because as I said, we can access this via the browser. So if you do wish to keep track of who has, or more importantly, sometimes hasn't read a document, you've got the ability of seeing that within here. Okay. So how do we get reports into here? So as I said before, some of them will be just financial based. Others, if I was to come in here, you might find you want to add a non-financial based report. So I can come in here and hit add multiple reports or add new report, depending on which way I want to go about it. And maybe I've got this job activity estimate report that I've run. Now, in this particular example, I have run this as a Greentree report, but as I said before, it may have been from some external option. That's going to import that into Greentree as a now unread report. And if I was to simply double click, you'll notice I've got the PDF view and the same options around adding notes, actions, so who created it and when, and potentially working on permissions as well. Now, that's how you'd add a report if it wasn't from Greentree itself. Obviously, if it's a Greentree run report, we do have a much more efficient way of handling that, and that would be simply to come into a Greentree report, whatever that might be, and we'll run the same one, being a job cost report here, and I'll just simply display it to screen. So any report you run within Greentree, when you hit the save option, you have open as Excel, PDF, and text. And if you have the reports and documents module, you've got the ability to save the PDF in the report library. So that's going to open up your published report screen. You can select which folder you wish to attach it to, a number of expiry options, which permissions you wish to attach, so who can view this report, and then as I said, the additional information will display as you go. So you don't have to save this to PDF just so as you can attach it back into the system. You can do it directly through the report or Greentree preview screen itself. So how do we set up some of these areas? So the reports library structure uses the standard system trees area within Greentree. So you simply come through and create a tree. You don't have to assign it to any specific company or what we call zones. You just simply set up the structure in which you wish your reports library to be managed. If I was to look at my reports library security group, you can then come through and that will show me the tree, and I can say which of the users have access to view, add, or delete reports within this area. And you can define whether or not it's a reports library or what you might often refer to, or what we often refer to as a documents library. That can be used to define who has access to see and where it might show up in menu options. So in addition to being able to run or view the reports, as I said, through my reports library, as well as my documents library, which is a similar looking screen, I've got that same features list of adding and removing documents as well as reports. If I was to go have a look at my browser login now, I can come on in and log into my Greentree browser. Now, whether or not I've got mobile HR, mobile timesheets, or a number of other licenses, we can add the reports and library options, document libraries options there as badges. So if I was to expand on that, you'll see that same list of notifications unread, the same menu structures as we were looking at just before, and I can come in here and hit download. So that just gives you the option of downloading the PDF option. So if I come in there, or potentially the Excel file depending on which way we've gone about it. But that will mark that as read. So if I do come back into my Windows client and now look at that as more of an admin type user, maybe HR, if that was a new policy or so on, and I wanted to see who has read it, then when I do come in and have a look at my recently viewed, I do have the option of coming in and seeing, I'll expand that a little bigger, that record. And if I look at my actions, I can see that it was viewed on the web at 10:35 today by the super user. So if you are concerned that people potentially during an induction haven't read the documentation, you do have the ability of seeing if they've been downloaded or not. Okay. So that is the Reports and Documents module. So as I said, you've got the ability of adding Greentree reports, whether they be from the financial report writer, whether they be from a standard Greentree preview of a report, or whether or not they're being imported via a simple upload process. You can then view them within the Windows client or via the browser, depending on your on your user and how they wish to access it. So what I thought we'd now do is we'll open that up to questions from the audience.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions already, and we're just going back through them. Okay, the first question we have is, does the browser WebView get the data directly from the Greentree server, or is data uploaded overnight to another location in the cloud?
So that is, well, regardless of the options I'm about to talk about, it's directly grabbed from the Greentree server. So the Greentree server will either store the results, and that comes back to that option I said of both publish results as well as viewing previously run reports. It can store those results. So whether or not you run it live or view a previously stored set of results, it is still talking to the Greentree database. So not a cloud solution there.
Okay, next question. How is Report and Documents module priced? Do you need a license for each report center only, or each person to whom they are sent?
So the Reports and Documents module, what you need is you need a license for running the reports or viewing the reports within either the Greentree or WebView modules. If you are simply receiving the reports via an email, you do not take up a license count. So it's about setting up the users appropriately to manage that. And what I'd probably suggest is have a conversation with your consultant, talk about your very specific business requirements. So who needs to get access to these reports and in what kind of format. And I think that's probably a better discussion to have individually about how it should be set up for you personally.
Okay, next question. When you email a report with notes, how are the notes visible to the recipient of the email?
Good question. So depending on how you've got that set up, they either might not be included in the reports. Alternatively, with the Excel versions, it can be included as, I believe, comments on that on the cell. But once again, I'd probably suggest going to your consultant and having a look at potentially how you wish to have them managed, because the alternate option might be to simply have them as part of the body of the email as a longer list, rather than overcomplicating the report structures themselves.
Okay, is the WebView Browser version included in our Greentree license fee, or is it an extra? How involved is the implementation and configuration?
Okay, so the report, if you've got the reports and documents module, then you have access to install the WebView browser. The WebView browser is a relatively easy setup process as far as the installation of it. As far as how you wish to define your menu structures and drill down options, that's a bit more of a specific or detailed conversation. However, we do have a number of options around that, and we do have some import-export capabilities, which was touched a little bit in the WebView Designer or WebView Part 1 section of today of this webinar series.
Does the module come with any reporting templates?
So in short, no. So I mean, the templates can be imported and exported. So if your best scenario is to have a conversation with your consultant and say, I would like to do a certain format, and generally speaking, that unless you're completely reinventing the wheel, which is unlikely, we've likely done something similar for others in the past, and we try and keep a bit of a library ourselves of the different options available. As I mentioned a little bit before, and I'll bring the screen back up again, within the financial reports, the column format section of the reports and documents is, I would say, fairly generic. And so things like month to date, year to date, actual versus budget, 12-month actuals is very, I'd say, data agnostic. It doesn't matter how your trees are set up. It doesn't really matter how you've decided to format your rows. You've got the ability of setting up, as I said, those calculations and headings and so on. The only thing that might differ is the what we call styles and how you might handle those if they're column specific. So they're very easy to import and export from one system to another. The row format is another story. That is very client specific, and it is based on your tree structures. So that is something that is less likely to be importable from a standard, I'd say, library. However, that doesn't mean you can't set up the various styles and manage those. So I think it's just, once again, a bit of a case-by-case basis on how we would look at importing that information. But the reports themselves are a much quicker process of setting up than I'd say, the Excel report writer.
Okay. Are the reports stored in Greentree in a separate folder, i.e. attachments? You have the option of not embedding, but can store them in an attachments folder. Do you have the same option with saving reports?
That is a very good question. I might have to take that one on notice and have a look at exactly where those reports are stored. So the financial report section, where it stores the results, that would still be within Greentree and not via the attachments, because it's not storing the PDF per se. It's storing the results of the financial report. The reports library, however, as I said, I might need to get back on that one. So what I'll do is I'll write that down, and I'll get your consultant to probably answer that one a bit more directly. If there are attachments within Greentree, however, generally speaking, if you've got attachments stored externally, those should be, as the name suggests, stored externally.
Thanks for that one, Kim. We always like to see Josh being caught short. He is absolutely brilliant when it comes to Greentree knowledge, and it's very rare for him not to have the answer at the top of his head. Okay, any more questions? Okay, looks like there's no more questions. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for signing in and attending today's webinar. We are still looking for new topics for webinars going forward. The next webinar we will have in April. We've got one of our external contacts coming in. from Alt McNamara, an accounting firm, and they will talk about more generic business issues than specifically Greentree functionality. However, I'm hoping that you'll all still sign in and find it of interest. Once again, if you have got any ideas for topics, please send them in to me. Later in the year, we're actually going to be highlighting some of the product suites and modules that are not as common amongst all of our clients. So I'd encourage you, if you see those invitations, even if you don't have those modules or suites yourselves, but you think that the functionality may be of interest to you, to log in and see what Greentree can do, because there's a lot out there that it might surprise you. So once again, thanks to Josh. Thanks to everyone for turning up. The webinar will be emailed out to all of you, and it will also be posted on our website and our YouTube page in due course. Goodbye.